The delivery isn't what I expected. The job wasn't finished like it should have been. The big ugly monster just came out from under my bed. Risks pop up all over our lives. But what is risk? And how do we know what makes it a risk and not just hard, risky, or scary? The dictionary definition says that risk is exposure to injury or loss. Injury and loss hurt. They hurt us physically, hurt our working relationships, or tarnish our company's image. Like this lion's splinter, even risks that are physically small can become really big and painful whenever they strike in the right place. Risks are things that are uncertain. We don't know if they're going to happen. In project management circles, these are commonly referred to as known unknowns. Things that we know could happen, but it's uncertain if they will happen. There are also risks that take us completely by surprise, which are unknown unknowns. We didn't even know these things could happen. We'll talk more about how to deal with those later. Activities that expose us to injury or loss are risks. You may be thinking that can happen anytime, anywhere. Yep, and we come into contact with risks every day, and we innately make decisions to either take the chance and do it, or do something else that has less exposure. So we're talking about risk, and we're not talking about things that are hard, like when you're faced with a mountainous task in front of you and it looks impossible. These hard things you can usually see from the very beginning. They take planning and coordinated effort to complete, one step at a time. How about instead of shoveling that mountain, we have to climb it? That sounds risky. When we know there's a risky operation in our work, we don't walk into it unless we're prepared for the danger, right? We wouldn't go rock climbing with kite string and thumbtacks. We prepare for the climb with the right shoes, rope, carabiners, and expertise. This is good project planning, not mitigating risks. So these things are not risks. Project managers call these known knowns because we know we have to do these tasks to complete the project. The work is certain. We just have to figure out how to succeed at the hard and risky parts of the job. So now we know that risk is an uncertain event that exposes us or our team to injury or loss. But life experience tells us that not everyone has the same threshold for exposure to risk. Some on your team want to drive that exposure to zero at all costs, and others are willing to bet the farm for a larger reward. These individual decisions show each person's risk tolerance, which helps us manage our risk individually. When we are working collaboratively, things get more complex, and we have to discuss and agree upon a common language to communicate those risks to one another. The big advantage to dealing with risk on a project or in any group situation is the ability to describe the risk quantifiably and reliably. To do that, we need to think in terms of our two components of risk and how they relate to each other. For that, we use a graphic known as a risk matrix. The matrix has two axes, where the y-axis is likelihood. This is an assessment of the chances that the something will happen. It ranges from very likely down to not very likely. The x-axis is consequence. How bad would this hurt? This is the size of the injury or loss that would occur if the something happened. These axis labels are very generic. It would benefit your team to develop operational definitions that will help you have common terms to differentiate low, moderate, and high on each axis. The combinations of these two components give us zones of the risk matrix. A high risk zone in red, low risk in green, and moderate risk in orange or yellow. If a given situation or event has low likelihood and low consequence of happening, then it's really not much of a risk at all, and we might not even bring it up. These are in the green zone. They are risks, but we don't really worry about them too much. On the other end of the matrix is our more typical situation that has risk, a high likelihood of happening and a high consequence of its occurrence, which is the red zone. In project risk management, we talk about the consequence to the project cost, schedule, or to maintaining quality, safety, or environmental compliance. Using those terms in our operational definitions allow us to have a common understanding of why these risks are where they are on the risk matrix. Naturally, in between the hair-raising risks in red and the everyday non-worrisome risks in green, we have that mid-range stuff that we normally show as yellow, concerned enough to make us slow down. The real power of this matrix is the bottom right and the top two corners. Let's walk through a few examples to show why. Every day, many of us take a shower in a tub or shower stall. And every day there's a risk of falling in the shower. Face it, what causes us to slip in the shower? Being soapy and wet. And unless you take a dry, soapless shower, chances are these conditions are there when you shower. Since those conditions are always there, we'd be inclined to say that there's a high likelihood for slipping in the shower. That puts us at the top of the likelihood scale. So now what's the consequence of slipping in the shower? I guess it'd be anything from an embarrassing moment to twisting an ankle to a good whack on the head by the soap dish. That could ruin your whole day. So the potential is there for high consequence. That would put taking a shower, something we do every day, into the upper right quadrant. And so I know what you're thinking. I never slip in the shower, so the likelihood must be low. But is likelihood based on just historical data, or should it be about the conditions present in the situation, regardless of who performs the task? Some of us are more clumsy than others. That's why this tool is so valuable. It allows teams to segregate the conversation into likelihood and consequence, and to agree on just where this risk should reside. Ideally, the consequence definitions your team creates would tell you that a whack on the head would be considered severe consequence and slippery conditions are a high likelihood. Or maybe a proven process would be medium likelihood. That's where those operational definitions can be a great help. Let's take a look at a situation in the lower right. Now, the reason we are going to use this example is that many times we allow the consequence part of a risk to overshadow our conversation. By using this matrix, you can quickly manage this misleading tendency. When kids go to bed and the light is turned out, they are sometimes terrified by the monster under the bed. Truly, the consequence of a monster in the dust bunnies would make any of us cower under the sheets. But face it, what is the likelihood that a monster is actually there? Most of us think it's very remote. But the reason this is such a powerful example is that because the consequence is so terrifying, it's hard to dismiss the concern, even with its remote likelihood. This is frequently how it sounds in many project meetings when people throw out showstopper risk events and call them high risk, when really they're just high consequence, and the likelihood is just not worth hiding under the sheets about. Let's look at our other corner, high likelihood and low consequence. This is the spilt milk situation. You know, the situation we don't need to cry over. Given any normal family meal with lots of elbows and storytelling, spilt milk is a likely situation. But after the initial whine about our wet pants or milk on the bread, we all calm down and not really cry over it. These type of risks, again, are easily talked about in a project using this tool and can actually prevent the death by 1,000 paper cuts situation. Or, if I keep with the metaphor, starvation by always skipping dinner to clean up the spilled milk. Now let's put this all into how we'd improve our project management by talking about managing risks using this tool. First, we need to identify consequences to schedule, to cost, and to quality. We don't just call anything that's hard or risky part of our risk management. We remember that from our definition. If the job is hard, like cutting down some well-rooted trees to clear the land to build a house, then we have a plan for that. We know it's hard and we plan to do the hard work. Similarly, clearing land has some typical riskiness to it, and we've already built that into our plan, so we hire some bulldozers. Our job is to figure out what might go wrong in clearing the land that would drive up our cost or delay our construction schedule. Our job is to think about what might go wrong in getting the materials, laying the foundation, or erecting the frame. And what could go wrong when we do the final outfitting and painting? How about landscaping? Listing all those possible events, finding their likelihood, considering their consequence to schedule, cost, and quality is the essence of project management. So that leaves us with a puzzling question. Just how do we manage these risks on our project? So to manage risks, we'll build on the foundation from this session where we learned the definition of what risk is and what it is not, the two components to risk, likelihood and consequence, and how to use those two components to sort risks, not letting one component overwhelm the other. These basics get us on our way to understanding risk, and the next time we'll discuss ways we can use our definitions and communication tool we learn in this session to actively manage risks.